Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to our talk on how MBTI surfaces in coaching. I'm going to give it a few minutes just to let the StreamYard hit the platforms before we dive into today's topic. I hope the first 2 days of 2026 have been kind to everybody. If you are tuned in, please say hi, let me know you're here. I love to make this an interactive talk. I see Donna's tuned in. Welcome, Donna. Good to see you. Happy New Year to you too. I can't believe how quick 2025 went. It was really fast now. So if you're tuned in, say hi. If you're watching the replay, drop your comments in the comments box. I love to make my lives a little bit interactive and to use the wisdom in the room and to bring your wisdom into this space and to make you part of this learning journey. So I'm going to jump in. We can win in a minute. So if you're tuning in late, as I mentioned, please say hi. There's going to be opportunities for you to engage throughout today. But what we're going to be looking at is how MBTI surfaces in coaching. We're going to go a little bit deeper than we normally do, and we're doing this in respect of World Introvert Day 2026. So do we have any introverts in the audience at the moment? If you're an introvert, put your hands up, drop a comment, let me know, and let's celebrate all the introverts around the globe right now. So the purpose of World Introvert Day is to acknowledge and appreciate the introverts around us. Often it's the extroverts that take up a lot of the space, a lot of the energy, get themselves out there. So today is about acknowledging the introverts. Do we have any introverts in the audience? Adele, great to see you here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Do we have any introverts in the audience? Does anybody know whether or not they are an introvert and extrovert? Is this brand new to everybody, this MBTI, introversion, extroversion? If it's new, don't worry. I'm going to cover the basics today in this 30 minutes together. So Adele is saying that she's an introvert. Donna is saying she is an introvert, more than an introvert than an extrovert. That's fantastic. Patricia, it's wonderful to see you here. Thank you so much for tuning in. So I sit on the borderline of introversion and extroversion, but I do fall slightly into the extroversion mark when I take the Myers-Briggs personality type test. But I strongly believe that I am an introvert. I feel like I get a lot of my energy on my own and spending time to myself. Patricia is also saying that she is an introvert. So happy World Introvert Day to everybody. And let's get into today's topic around how MBTI, which is Myers-Briggs type indicator, surfaces within our coaching. So for those of you who are new to MBTI, it was originally founded by Carl Jung. So Carl Jung was the first one to define psychological preferences with regards to personalities. But this was quite a complex psychological model, and it wasn't until later on, quite recently, that Myers-Briggs, so Catherine Myers and Isabel Briggs, made this a little bit more simple, put it into a very quite large document. I say quite simple, but it is quite a large document. And off the back of this, created 16 different types of personality. So Casmin's here in Building 7. Thank you for being here, Casmin. Wonderful to see you. So they built 16 different types of personalities based on 4 different characteristics. First of all, where we get our energy from. Second of all, how we take in information. Third of all, how we make decisions. And fourth of all, our approach to life. And it was our approach to life, which was the new kind of adaptation that both Catherine Myers and Isabel Briggs added on to the Carl Jung's work around psychological preferences and types with regards to personalities. So does anybody actually know their 4 numbers? I'm going to go into each of them and give you a little bit more information on each of these in a moment. Does anybody know what their MBTI type is? Drop it in the comments box. I'd love to know. So I'm actually an ENFJ. which is quite interesting because when I first took the MBTI test back in 2014, I started off as an ESTJ and then moved to ENFJ. So I've had a little bit of a change. These different preferences can change and adapt over time. So Donna is saying she's an INFJ. So we've got an INFJ, which is introversion, intuition, feeling, and judging. I'm going to go into each of these in a moment, Donna, so people can understand. If this is new to you and you don't know your personality type, maybe you've forgotten it, maybe you want to revisit and do it again just to see if your personality type has changed, I have a QR code to a free link to a survey for you to do that at the end of this talk. Kesho, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Great to see you tuned in. Patricia is saying that she is an INTJ. So we've got a few introverts in, which is fantastic. And sorry, she said she's an INFJ. Excellent. So similar to me, but I've got the extroversion rather than the introversion. Wonderful stuff. Adele's saying she's an ISFP. Wonderful. So for those of you who are new to MBTI, you've just seen 4 letters being thrown around. I'm going to explain this to you in just a moment. So Patricia's saying that the T and the F are very close. Now, excellent. No, great stuff. So let's take a look. What do all these numbers mean? What does it mean for us? And more importantly, what does it mean for our coaching and our coaching practice? And how does this surface in coaching? And what can we do as coaches to build the relationships with our clients and improve the transformations that we make with our clients' lives? So let's take a look. So the first thing I want to mention is that whilst we are looking at these different letters, these different types, these preferences that we have, it's not about putting people into boxes. It's actually all about opening people up to self-discovery and self-awareness. So we're not finding out our 4-digit numbers, our 4 letters, to ensure that we are to put a label on ourselves, but we're actually looking and taking these personality types, understanding our personality type, so that we can get a deeper level of self-awareness and self-discovery. So the first one we look at is introversion and extroversion. So this is all around how we like to obtain energy. So if we are an introvert, we like to get our energy from within. We like our own time, we like peace, we like tranquility. We get our energy from spending time on our own. On the other end of the spectrum, when it comes to how we gain our energy, we have the extroverts. And those that are extroverts, they look outward for their energy, and they get their energy and be energized from being around people, from being engaged in activities and taking action. So the first characteristic that we have is we're either an introvert or we're an extrovert. The second is how we take in information. So we are either going to be very sensing or we are going to be very intuitive on the intuition end of the spectrum. And the reason for those of you who are thinking, why is there an N here and not an I? It's because we've already used the I with introverts. When we're using the letters in the Myers-Briggs personality type, the I stands for introvert. So we've taken the second letter in intuition, which is an N, to label intuition here for Myers-Briggs. So if we're sensing, we're very focused on reality. Facts, figures, this is the information that we like. We want what is concrete. If we're on the intuition side, if we're very intuitive, we like to think about future possibilities. We like ideas. We like to think about the future. So that is sensing and intuition and the information that we like to gather. The next characteristic is how we make decisions. And this is the head versus the heart. Now, some of us might be thinking in terms of we like to make decisions based on logic, based on objectivity, based on cause and effect, or we might be on the other side, and some of us might be sitting right in the middle in a balance, or we might be on the feeling side, where we like to make decisions based on values, based on the impact that our decisions will have on other people. So we'll have a preference towards one or the other, thinking or feeling. And finally, the fourth aspect or characteristic when we're looking at MBTI is whether or not we are judging or perceiving. And this is the approach that we take to life. So if we're on the judging side of the spectrum, we like to plan, we like to have control, we like to do to-do lists, we like to have everything organized. But on the other end, if we're more perceiving, then we like spontaneity. We like flexibility. We like to be able to adapt. We don't like rigid structures. So we'll fall on one end or the other. We'll have a preference towards how we approach life, whether it's more planned or more flexible. Now, I'm just seeing if anybody else is sharing what they've got in here in terms of their Myers-Briggs types. So no one just yet. So how do you use this in coaching? So I'm going to ask you now, we've got a couple of coaches tuned in. How are you applying Myers-Briggs in your coaching? So I've just done a quick overview of the different types in the MBTI. And now we're going to bring this and look at how this surfaces in coaching. Do you currently use it, first of all? And if so, how do you apply this in coaching? Let me know. So a common approach that coaches can take, and one of the ways in which we can start to use MBTI in our coaching practice, is we can use it as a bit of self-discovery, as an awareness tool with our clients. So we can send them a copy of this during our sessions. I know a lot of coaches that actually do this at the beginning before the coaching relationship starts. They get a bit of a detailed understanding of their client and how they can adapt their coaching practice, which is fantastic. We need to be careful with that when we do send out MBTI surveys or personality type questionnaires. We need to think back to what I mentioned earlier on. It's not about putting an individual in a box, and there's a risk that we have certain preconceived biases after reading the background and the personality type preference of our clients. We need to be careful with that. But a good starting way of exploring this is bringing this into our coaching practice as a tool. But what I want to encourage us to do is take it a little step further. And I haven't got lots of information for you today, but I have, as a coach, got a lot of questions for you to take away and reflect upon. So we're going to look at how these different types can surface in our coaching. So there's more to it than just giving a questionnaire and understanding 4 letters. So just to think and reflect on this scenario, what if you have a coach that is an ISTJ and you have a client which is an ENTJ? What is going to happen in our coaching relationships where we have a coach that has a different personality type to a client? And I'm just using this on the screen as an example. So Donna is saying the client becomes more aware, resourceful, and capable of growth. I'm guessing that's going back to my earlier question around how we use it in coaching and the benefits of the self-awareness and self-discovery of using MBTI type questionnaires with our clients. But what do we think the impact that's going to have on the relationship where we have two coaches, where we have a coach and a client that have 2 different personality types? For example, what if the coach is very extroverted and the client is very introverted? What does this mean for our coaching? What impact might that have on the relationship with the client? How do we have a preferred approach to our coaching based on our MBTI personality type? Now, I'm going to explore this in a little bit more detail. So just a few questions for you to reflect upon there. So first of all, where we have a client that is an introvert and a coach as an extrovert, what might happen here? What do we need to be aware of? What do we need to think about? Now, as an extroverted coach, just thinking about coaching in general, we might want to use, for example, the spaces of silence that we get in our coaching conversations. As an extroverted coach, we might jump straight in with our question, using that space to gain energy. Where if we are an introverted coach, our approach is going to be slightly different. We're going to use those spaces of silence to process, to gather our thoughts, and to consider the next question that we are going to ask our client. And it depends on the client's personality type to which approach is best to take. Do we want to bring extroversion into our coaching space if the client is an introvert? If we're heavily extroverted and the client is introverted, is there a risk that we are going to damage the rapport with the client? How do we choose whether to bring extroversion and introversion into our coaching space? Something for us to think about, something for us to consider. Equally, if we have a client that is sensing and a coach that is intuitive, how might that show up in coaching? What impact might this have on the coaching relationship? I'm just going to bring in some comments. So Donna's saying, a coach should always meet the client where they're energy wise and how we express ourselves and the language we use. Beautiful, Donna. I love that. Definitely agree with that. Vijay is saying we need to find a balance so that we do not overwhelm the client to be too assertive. 100% Vijay. Thank you for sharing that. Patricia is saying, I feel MBTI can really help people start thinking of how they show up in the world. 100%. It did that for me. What makes me hesitant to use it, that there is so much discussion about the credibility of the Myers-Briggs. According to the academic world, the world is that this has no scientific backing. So it doesn't have much scientific backing. It is very question and credible, but as a coach, we're not here to use it as a psychoanalysis tool. We're here to use it as a self-awareness and a self-discovery tool. So it can give us an idea. Like I said, the important point is we're not using it to put people in boxes and to give people labels. We're using this to help people get a better understanding of themselves. And we're taking it that step further as coaches to start to explore, reflect, and think how our own personality type preferences are servicing in coaching and might be impacting and affecting the relationship that we have with our clients. So we've just talked about introversion and extroversion. Now we're looking at where a client might be sensing and a coach might be intuitive. Now let's look at what a sensing coach and an intuitive coach might look like differently in coaching. So remember, sensing and intuition is how we like to take information. So those who are sensing, so a sensing coach is all around, they live in the reality, they live in the practicality. It's all about logic, fact, things that they can feel and witness through their five senses. And as a sensing coach, we might create a blinder or a blind spot for ourselves where our questions are very focused on logic and practicalities, rather than exploring, when we look at the intuition, future possibilities, ideas. So sometimes if we have a preference towards a sensing in terms of our MBTI, it can limit the approach we take to our coaching questions. Equally, as an intuitive coach, we might lean towards asking those future possibility questions, those ideas, those visionary questions in that coaching space. But if our client is sensing as a preference, what impact is that going to have on the relationship, and how useful are those questions going to be to a client that is sensing? So again, we need to step back as a coach. We need to reflect and understand, is our client sensing? Are they heavily leaning towards intuition? What is our personality type? And how do we catch where we might be limiting ourselves because of our MBTI personality type? Like I said, we might be limited to just asking those practical questions, or we might be limited to just asking those future focused questions on possibility and potential for the client. Whereas a coach, we really need to find the balance and the sweet spot between both. Adele is saying the difference in energy, the coach needs to be aware to match the client's energy. 100%. We need to step outside of our preference. We need to understand where our preferences might be creating friction in the relationship. We need to step back from that and match the client at their energy. The same with our question. We need to step away, not be leaned in, and not be led by our personality type preferences. Take that step back and match the client. 100%. So we're seeing a theme here. The next, where we've got a thinking client and a feeling coach. Again, we run a risk of as being a thinking coach in terms of thinking as our preference, asking questions that are leading the client down the path of thinking rather than feeling, in terms of making decisions based on their head rather than their heart. And vice versa, equally, when it comes to us being a feeling coach, our questions might be more around emotions, the values, and we might not ask those logical questions and those questions around the thought of using our head, the thinking questions. So sometimes our personality type can limit us. And again, we need to be aware of, are we thinking, are we feeling? Is my client thinking or feeling? And how do I adapt my coaching approach to ensure that I'm satisfying my client's needs in terms of not being limited to just asking questions around their values and their emotions, but I'm also looking at the logic as well and taking that practical approach to the coaching session. And finally, judging versus perceiving. We need to sit and reflect. What if I have a client that is leaning towards being judging in terms of their MBTI? What if the coach is of perceiving? And remember, when we look at judging and perceiving, this is our approach to life. This is whether we like to be planned, organized, and structured, or whether we like to flexibility, adaptability, and spontaneity. So judging and perceiving. How might that show up in coaching, and how do we find the balance? Now, if we're a judging coach, we might be leaned our preference, our approach to our coaching in terms of our questions and the approach that we structure our session. We might have a well-structured session that's very focused on action orientated, getting a commitment from the client and closing the session with next steps and things that the client needs to do between now and the next session. Where on the other hand, as a perceiving coach who is quite flexible and adaptable, we might be able to go with the flow of the client session. So these are your emergent style coaches here when you're looking at a perceiving coach. You're happy to go with the flow of the client. You're happy to follow them in any direction that they need. But the strength here is to allow insights to emerge through the conversation that you're having. You're not very focused on action or very action oriented, pushing the client to get results. And again, this depends on your client. Sometimes taking the approach as a perceiving coach can be very beneficial, depending on what the client wants and needs. And sometimes taking the judging coach approach can be very beneficial for the client as well. So we need to step back, we need to think, am I judging? Am I perceiving? Is my preferences on MBTI, are they manifesting? Are they showing up in my coaching? And are they limiting the transformation for my client? So I'm going to come back to the comments. There's lots of stuff coming through here, which is wonderful. Vijay is saying it is more practicality or future vision. See how the responses can be able to challenge our direction as a coach. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Vijay. She's also saying we need to remind ourselves as a coach that the session is for the client, not for us as a coach. And I love that you mentioned that, Vijay, because the session is for the client, and all sessions need to be client-led with the client's agenda. That's what we teach on coaching, that we learn as coaches. But when it comes to MBTI, we need to be able to spot our biases, where we might be limiting ourselves, whether our questions are too action orientated, whether our questions are too related on logic and facts and the reality of the now, and we're missing those future style questions, looking at possibility. So it's understanding how our MBTI type preference, our personality preference, is showing up maybe subconsciously in our coaching practice, how we can become conscious of it and how we can adapt to build that relationship with our clients to a deeper level, and also to help with the transformation and the goals of the client. And Donna's also saying being curious as to how the client makes decisions is valuable, and exploring if they rely on their head, heart, or gut to steer them. Exactly. And this is why it's important, Donna, why it's useful to sometimes use the MBTI as a self-awareness and discovery tool. Because if we understand where our clients' preferences are, so whether they're an introvert or an extrovert, whether they're sensing or intuitive, whether they're thinking or feeling or judging or perceiving, this can help us adapt our coaching approach to suit their MBTI style. But it all starts with becoming aware of it, becoming aware of our own. And that leads me on to the key and final point of today's short talk to acknowledge World Introvert Day. Is it's not just about using the tool, for self-awareness and self-discovery, and leaving the client with those feelings that this is great to know about me, it really understands me, and I can use this to understand and communicate better with other people. That's fantastic, but we need to take it that step further as coaches and understand how we adapt our personality preferences in our coaching to match and meet our clients in the session. And a lot of people got to this. A lot of those who are tuned in, Donna, Vijaya, Adele, a lot of wonderful people are tuned in. They've already got to that before we managed to reach the key point, which is wonderful. So MBTI, personality type preferences are fantastic. There's a lot of credibility and questions around credibility of them in terms of a psychological questionnaire. But we are, as coaches, we can use them for self-awareness, for deeper self-discovery, and we can use them to build on the relationships and how we communicate and connect with our clients in our session. And if all this sounds like a foreign language to you, then you can scan the QR code on the screen. That will take you to 16personalities.com. It's a free website that allows you to understand your MBTI. It's quite extensive, so set your time about 20 minutes to half an hour to answer all the questions and find out what your 16 personality is. What is your preferences and your types? It gives you a nice detailed report. You can read about it all, learn more about yourself. And then from there, you can start to think about how you bring and introduce this into coaching in a way that you're offering it to clients, you're not forcing it on clients, and that you are managing to always keep your coaching sessions client-led. You're not leading the sessions to what you're doing in terms of your MBTI work. But the most important point from today is not just using it as a self-awareness or self-discovery tool, but understanding our own preference, understanding our client's preference, and how we can adapt our coaching approach to make sure that we are keeping our coaching sessions client-led and we're building the relationship at a deeper level. And if you're interested to learn more, we have a lot of resources in Coaching Minds. If you're interested to join us as a coach, there's also a QR code to Coaching Minds on the screen. We're going to be doing lots of talks on LinkedIn this year about different topics. I'm trying to keep it to half an hour. For those of you who know MBTI in a little bit more detail, there's a couple of 100-page document around MBTI, and to put it into half an hour is not enough time. So if you want to learn more, you want to connect with me and everybody here at Coaching Minds, you can scan the QR code on the screen. But I do want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's tuned in. Thank you for the engagement, for the comments. Thank you to Vijaya, Donna, Patricia, Adele, everybody who's tuned in today, just some ones that have been really active in the comments box. If you are watching the replay, I'd love to know what your personality type is and how you use MBTI in coaching and how you adapt your coaching to cater for your clients. I want to wish you all a wonderful year ahead. Happy 2026 again. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the comments box. I'm happy to get back to you, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thank you very much.